It doesn't come quietly, it doesn't slow down, and once it's locked on, escape is almost impossible. We're talking about a weapon so advanced that its mere possibility has Russia deeply concerned. Not a meteor from space, but Sweden's Meteor missile, and if it ever reaches Ukraine, it could dramatically reshape the air war. A message from the skies in early February. New reports began circulating after a high-level meeting between Ukraine's defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov and Sweden's defense minister Pål Jansson. At first glance, the meeting looked routine, another discussion about military aid. But buried inside those conversations was something far more consequential. Sweden is preparing one of its most significant support packages for Ukraine to date, and it includes capabilities that Russia has very few answers for. What Sweden is actually sending. Before we get to the Meteor missile itself, it's important to understand the broader package Sweden is assembling. According to official Ukrainian and European reporting, the aid will include advanced air defense systems, cutting-edge radars developed by Saab electronic warfare equipment, and most notably, long-range strike drones. These drones are not designed for frontline skirmishes. They are meant to reach deep into Russian-controlled territory. Ukraine's long-range Record Ukraine has already proven it knows how to use this kind of capability. In 2025 alone, Ukrainian long-range drones successfully struck at least 16 major Russian oil refineries, some of them repeatedly. At one point, European reporting estimated that nearly 40% of Russia's refining capacity was temporarily offline. That wasn't symbolic damage. It directly impacted Russia's revenue and logistics. Now imagine those operations backed by Swedish technology. Sweden's long game. What makes this even more significant is Sweden's own investment path. In January, Sweden announced plans to spend roughly $440 million developing its own long-range drones and electronic warfare systems. That opens the door to two possibilities: Sweden supplying systems directly to Ukraine or funding Ukrainian domestic production using Swedish designs. Either way, the result is the same. Ukraine's ability to strike high-value targets keeps improving. The ballistic missile problem. Another major topic discussed during the meeting was Ukraine's struggle against Russia's constant ballistic missile attacks. Sweden has hinted at helping Ukraine strengthen its defenses through international mechanisms, particularly the Pearl Initiative, which we'll come back to later. But while air defenses protect cities, something else can change the battlefield entirely. That brings us to the headline weapon, the Meteor missile. What makes it special? Let's be clear. The Meteor missile is not yet confirmed for immediate delivery, but according to multiple reports, Sweden and Ukraine are actively discussing it, and for good reason. The Meteor is widely regarded as the most lethal, beyond visual range air-to-air missile in service today. What the Meteor can do, developed by Saab alongside several European partners, the Meteor is designed to engage targets long before the enemy even knows it's being tracked. Key characteristics include Mach 4 plus, speed a range of roughly 100 kilometers, a massive no-escape zone of around 60 kilometers, advanced resistance to electronic warfare mid-course guidance updates via data link, a dual-mode fuse system for maximum lethality. Once a target enters that no-escape zone, survival becomes extremely unlikely. Why Russia fears? Russia's current air strategy relies heavily on standoff attacks, aircraft launch, glide bombs, and cruise missiles from well behind the front lines, staying outside the reach of Ukraine's older air-to-air weapons. The Meteor changes that equation. Instead of trying to intercept bombs, Ukraine could target the aircraft launching them. Destroying one bomber prevents dozens of future strikes. The scale of the threat, the numbers alone explain why this matters. In just one recent month, Russia reportedly launched thousands of attack drones, thousands of guided bombs, hundreds of missiles. These attacks are becoming routine, and Ukraine needs a way to push Russian aircraft farther back or eliminate them entirely. Why Meteor is a qualitative leap. Military analysts emphasize that this isn't just another missile. It represents a generational leap in Ukraine's air combat capability. Ukraine would gain access to a weapon that outclasses most of what Russia currently fields. It wouldn't create instant air superiority, but it would force Russia to change how it operates. That alone is a strategic victory. The aircraft question. There is one complication. The Meteor isn't compatible with every aircraft. It currently works with F-35's Eurofighter Typhoons. Rafale's and Sweden's own JAS-39 Gripen. Ukraine doesn't operate these jets yet, but that may be changing. The Gripen connection. In October, Sweden and Ukraine signed a letter of intent covering a potential deal for 100 to 150 Gripen fighter jets. While not a binding contract, the signal was unmistakable. Ukraine is planning for a modern air force, and Sweden is ready to help build it. When could this happen? According to Ukrainian leadership, the first Gripen jets could arrive as early as 2026, with additional aircraft delivered over time. Each Gripen can carry multiple Meteor missiles, dramatically increasing Ukraine's ability to contest the skies. Local production, a strategic shift. Even more striking is what comes next. Ukraine and Sweden have also discussed localizing Gripen production inside Ukraine. By the early 2030s, Ukraine could be assembling components domestically. That would mark a historic shift from aid recipient to defense manufacturer. A deepening partnership. Beyond aircraft and missiles, Sweden and Ukraine are launching joint defense innovation programs. These initiatives would fund experimental weapons tests. New systems on the battlefield accelerate. Ukraine's technological edge. Sweden isn't just supplying hardware. It's investing in Ukraine's long-term military future. The Pearl Initiative. Sweden may also contribute to Pearl, NATO's prioritized weapons funding mechanism. Through Pearl, allies pool funds to purchase critical systems like Patriot air defenses directly for Ukraine. If Sweden adds funding here, Ukraine's missile defense network grows even stronger. Why this terrifies Putin? This isn't about one missile, it's about momentum. Sweden is helping Ukraine move from survival to transformation. A Ukraine with long-range strike drones, advanced electronic warfare, modern fighters, and Meteor missiles is a Ukraine Russia has never faced before. Final thoughts. Nothing here happens overnight, but the direction is clear. If these plans continue, Ukraine's airspace will become far more dangerous for Russian aircraft, and Russia's margin for error will shrink rapidly. That's why the Meteor matters, not because it's coming tomorrow, but because it represents the future, and that future is closing in fast. Outrow, if you want more deep dive military analysis like this, subscribe to the channel. We break down the weapons, the strategy, and the numbers, without the noise. Money fuels wars. And for years, Russia has relied on cash flow, energy revenue, reserves, and creative workarounds to keep the invasion going. But right now, two financial pressure points are hitting Moscow at the same time. Russia's frozen assets are being used to support Ukraine, and a key buffer Russia leans on, gold, has shown extreme volatility. Stay with me because by the end of this video, you'll understand how Ukraine is getting billions without paying it back, and why Russia is suddenly facing a much more uncomfortable math problem. The big shift. Russia's frozen assets are now a tool. 0-10 to 2-30. Let's start with the headline development. The frozen Russian sovereign assets in Europe, roughly $210 billion, largely held through systems like Euroclear, have become the financial foundation for a major international support mechanism for Ukraine. For months, there was a legal and political dilemma. Confiscating the principal outright is complicated, but doing nothing leaves billions sitting idle while Ukraine needs funding. So the solution that gained traction is simple in concept, but powerful in practice. Use the profits and interest generated by immobilized Russian assets to support Ukraine's financing without forcing Ukraine to repay from its own budget. What is the ERA mechanism 235 CRAW? The mechanism you're describing is widely known as the G7 Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration ERA Loans Initiative. Here's the core idea. The G7 agreed on a framework to provide about $50 billion in loans to Ukraine. Those loans are backed by the extraordinary revenues, the interest and profits generated by immobilized Russian sovereign assets, and importantly, the EU has already moved on implementation. The European Commission, for example, has described disbursements under its part of the G7 loan effort, structured to be repaid using proceeds from the immobilized Russian state assets. Why this matters. This isn't just aid, it's a financial architecture that gives Ukraine near-term breathing room, reduces immediate budget panic, and places the repayment burden on the revenue stream linked to Russia's frozen funds, not on Ukraine's taxpayers. Ukraine doesn't pay it back. Explained clearly. 7:30. Let's make this super clear for viewers. Ukraine receives financing now. Later, repayments are serviced through a structure tied to the profits from immobilized Russian assets, rather than Ukraine writing checks out of its own future budgets for decades. This design is politically and legally attractive because it avoids the most controversial step, full seizure of the principal, while still converting Russia's immobilized wealth into real, ongoing support for Ukraine, and it's not a small effect. This is the kind of support that can keep the lights on, keep payrolls moving, and support defense procurement, especially when war expenditures strain public finances. 4. Why the EU's structure is so hard to reverse, 7:39:30. One reason this is so significant is that the EU has been looking for ways to make these actions durable, not easily blocked by a small number of holdouts. Multiple analyses and reporting have highlighted the EU's ability to use emergency time crisis procedures that reduce the power of individual vetoes in certain contexts. That matters because one of Russia's consistent strategies is to wait for political unity to crack. If the mechanism is designed to keep functioning even during political turbulence, it becomes a long-term constraint on Moscow. What this does to Russia's incentives, 9:30-11:30. Here's the psychological and strategic impact. Russia isn't just losing access to assets. Russia is watching a financial structure emerge where the principal remains frozen and the earnings help fund Ukraine's resilience. That's a constant drain of opportunity year after year while the war continues. It also sends a message. The longer the conflict lasts, the more Russia's immobilized wealth becomes a tool against its own war aims. Now the second punch, gold volatility, 11:30-14. Now let's talk about the second pressure point mentioned in your transcript. Gold. Gold has been one of the most important strategic assets for Russia during the war era, partly because it's a globally traded store of value and can be used in complex trade flows. But here's what matters right now. In late January 2026, markets saw major volatility. Reports described gold hitting record territory near $5,600 Oz, then experiencing a sharp drop shortly after, while silver also fell hard. Whether you call it a correction, a shock, or the start of a larger unwind, one point stands. When gold swings that violently, any major holder is exposed to valuation risk, and Russia is a major holder. Why gold movements matter to Russia. 14:16 SER. If a country is depending on reserves and commodity buffers to support wartime spending, then price shocks create real stress. If gold is sold to raise liquidity, a lower price means less cash for the same amount of metal. If gold is used to support confidence, sharp drops undermine that signaling power. If the country is leaning on gold as a financial backstop, volatility makes budgeting harder. And this is happening while Russia is also dealing with the reality that much of its sovereign wealth abroad remains immobilized. So you get a compounding effect, restricted access to overseas reserves, plus unstable valuation in a key buffer asset. The China factor, 16-1, 18-1. Another theme in your transcript is the idea that Russia may not be able to count on any single partner forever. And that's the cold reality of international economics. Major powers act in self-interest. Even if trade continues, it is rarely based on loyalty. It's based on leverage, pricing, and benefit. So if market conditions change, if gold becomes less attractive, if geopolitical costs rise, or if alternative deals become better, relationships can shift quickly. That uncertainty is a strategic disadvantage. What this means for the war timeline, 18, 19, 20. Now, to be careful and responsible here, no one can predict exact timelines. But financially, the direction is clear. Ukraine is getting structured support that is harder to block, and that reduces immediate fiscal panic. Russia is facing long-term immobilization of massive assets in Europe, while key markets show instability. That combination shifts the endurance math. Wars don't end because one side runs out of money overnight, but money pressure changes decision-making, procurement, and political stability over time. Outro, 19 to 2020 Zao. So here's the bottom line. Ukraine is gaining a financial lifeline where Russia's immobilized wealth helps power Ukraine's survival, while Russia faces a tougher environment to sustain wartime spending buffers. If you want more breakdowns like this, where we follow the money, follow the systems, and translate complex mechanisms into plain English, hit subscribe. And in the next video, we'll look at the other side of this equation: energy revenues, sanctions pressure, and what happens when war finance collides with real-world markets. Long-range strike drones, advanced electronic warfare, modern fighters, and Meteor missiles is a Ukraine Russia has never faced before. Final thoughts. Nothing here happens overnight, but the direction is clear. If these plans continue, Ukraine's airspace will become far more dangerous for Russian aircraft, and Russia's margin for error will shrink rapidly. That's why the Meteor matters, not because it's coming tomorrow, but because it represents the future, and that future is closing in fast. Outrow, if you want more deep dive military analysis like this, subscribe to the channel. We break down the weapons, the strategy, and the numbers without the noise. Russia's war runs on money, and right now, that money is disappearing. Sevens Europe is sitting on over $200 billion in frozen Russian assets, and now that money is quietly being used to support Ukraine. Here's the twist: Ukraine doesn't have to pay it back. Russia does, without touching the principal. At the same time, the one financial safety net Russia relies on, gold, just showed extreme volatility, wiping out tens of billions in value almost overnight. So now Putin faces a double hit: frozen assets funding Ukraine, and a shaky war chest back home. If this trend continues, Russia's ability to fund the war could change fast. I break down exactly how this works and why it matters in the full video. Link in the description.